Hi, I'm Clyde Haberman of the New York Times, filling in for Sam Roberts. Overturning Roe v. Wade and New York's concealed carry gun law went far to label this past Supreme Court term as its most conservative in decades. When it comes back into session on the first Monday in October, the six conservatives will have a new liberal judge next to them. More on that in a bit. And then the court will decide some more of the most sweeping cases this country has seen. Joining me from Washington is the New York Times' Supreme Court correspondent, Adam Liptak. Welcome back, Adam, and thank you. Long before us, Al Jolson said, folks, you ain't seen nothing yet. Would that apply to this conservative majority? Are they only just beginning to reshape American jurisprudence?
They seem to be restless, ambitious, impatient, and they are not shy about moving very quickly on big agenda items and uniformly moving to the right.
Clarence Thomas set a bit of a roadmap, perhaps, for them by saying that among the things that he thinks should be on the block are same-sex marriage and a few other items. I should note that he did not point out that Loving v. Virginia ought to be on there. That's the one that knocked down laws forbidding interracial marriage. Maybe I'm being too cynical about that part, but does Clarence Thomas, in effect, is he in the driver's seat?
No, I wouldn't go that far. I don't know that there are 5 votes. He listed 3 cases he would like to see overruled. One on same-sex marriage.
Contraception, right?
One on contraception, that's right, and one on constitutional protection for gay intimacy. He did not mention, as you say, interracial marriage. But I'm not sure there are 5 votes for any of those things. I don't know that that's a principal distinction that the majority would draw. The majority decision in the abortion case, the logic of it would seem to lead to overruling cases in those other areas. But abortion seemed to be a special target of this newly constituted 6-justice conservative supermajority.
Can I ask you for a bit of an historical look here? Is this conservative majority more activist than, let's say, the Earl Warren Court was in the 1950s and 60s into the very early 70s, where we obviously had some monumental decisions by that court, be it the Brown versus Board decision, the Miranda case, or Gideon v. Wainwright, which guaranteed a right to counsel. Is this court a right-wing equivalent, or is that an imprecise comparison?
Well, activism is a tough thing to measure and talk about. To some extent, it's in the eye of the beholder. A decision you don't like, you can say is activist. Political scientists will sometimes measure activism by how often are precedents overruled or how often are laws struck down. And the court led by John Roberts is on those metrics in line with earlier courts, including the court led by Earl Warren. Of course, there's a difference in the minds of many people between what the Warren court did, which is expand rights, and what we just saw in the abortion case, which is quite unusual, to eliminate, after half a century, a constitutional right that the court had found in Roe v. Wade in 1973.
Your mention of John Roberts anticipated a question I intended to ask a bit later, but is he effectively sidelined as leader of the court?
No, I wouldn't go that far because there's not a lot of daylight between him and the 5 conservatives to his right on issues like race and campaign finance and religion. So to a certain extent, all 6 of the conservatives move in lockstep. But the abortion case was an important counterexample where the Chief Justice would have moved much more slowly and incrementally, to the right to be sure, but not to have taken such a radical step as to overrule Roe v. Wade. So it's a difference of degree, not kind. But the Chief Justice is definitely a fan of incremental movement, not cataclysmic movement.
And does that create tensions with the other conservatives on the court who are clearly willing to move at a lot faster clip than he is?
You have to think so. And you have to think that although people call it the Roberts Court. And it was the Roberts Court only a couple of years ago when he took over the center seat, the swing justice seat from Justice Anthony Kennedy. He was both the Chief Justice and the swing justice. But with the arrival of Amy Coney Barrett, the dynamic has changed. And you can make the case, which you were suggesting, Clyde, that he is to some large extent sidelined.
The arrival of Ketanji Brown Jackson on the court, the first black woman, obviously that itself is of historic nature. But is there less there perhaps than meets the eye, given the fact that she will probably be part of the three in a 6-3 ruling? Is she to some degree irrelevant? Or am I wrong on that, in that you never know how a new person, when introduced into a small circle like 9 justices, how the dynamic changes, how she adds a perspective that none of the other 8 have? Then can that be an influence? I know historically we've seen that sort of influence. Could it happen again?
There's some truth to that at the margins, but on the whole, the dynamic of the court doesn't change. It's a 1-for-1 liberal swap. Breyer, a liberal, replaced by Justice Jackson, a liberal. The 6-3 dynamic doesn't change. And in fact, probably to some extent, they lose power because seniority means a lot at the court. Breyer was a strategic thinker. It takes a new justice some time to get up on his or her feet. So I think it would be too optimistic from the perspective of liberals to think that Justice Jackson will make a difference in the outcomes of cases anytime soon.
It had been my understanding that the court doesn't like to stray too far from received public opinion. Is that still true now? Or is there a public be damned attitude on the part of justices that there is an agenda and let's get moving? This 6-3 won't last forever. Nothing does. And so is this court really out of step with public opinion on the key issues of the day?
The court seems not to be paying attention to public opinion. Justice Alito, in his majority opinion in the Dobbs case, the abortion case, said as much, that it's not our job to follow public opinion, it's our job to follow the law. And one way to tell that they are out of step with public opinion is their own public opinion ratings are plummeting. The public is not happy with where the Supreme Court is going. The court is to the right of where the median American voter is.
And does it matter to them?
I don't think it matters much. And I think that's partly because the ways in which the court can be disciplined by the political branches, like expanding its size, restricting its jurisdiction, imposing term limits, seem to be non-starters in this polarized era where Congress is really incapable of doing anything.
The phrase, that is settled law, which has been invoked by a number of these justices at their confirmation hearings. May I assume that the next person who's up for a Supreme Court appointment who says that this or that decision with settled laws risk being hooted out of the room, never to be seen again? I mean, is that just a done deal? And it's sort of a related question. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has proposed the impeachment of Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh for effectively having lied, in her view, about Roe v. Wade. Is that just a political posture, or might that have legs?
So the idea of impeaching a Supreme Court justice is simply never going to happen. That 2/3 of the Senate would vote to remove a Supreme Court justice is not going to happen, whatever the truth and weight of the allegations. I also think that the justices spoke carefully, And it's one thing to say it's a precedent of the court entitled to the respect that all precedent is due, and another, which the ordinary American and members of Congress and Senator Collins in particular seem to hear as a promise. Lawyers heard that as a truism. Yeah, every decision is precedent, worthy of respect is precedent, unless you decide that it's no good anymore. So I think the justices succeeded in conveying the impression that they weren't going to overrule Roe, but I don't know that they made a commitment.
The leak of the Roe decision in May has obviously caused a great sensation. Will it have a lasting effect on trust? Justice Thomas has said that a certain collegiality and mutual trust has broken down. Is he right on this? And does that affect? Does that have a meaningful effect for those of us who are looking at the bottom line of what their decisions are?
I do think it has an effect. I take Justice Thomas at his word that he thinks that this is a court where there's been a real loss of trust. The leak came from somewhere. They say they're investigating it. That investigation alone is no doubt going to cause friction at the court. And yeah, any breakdown in collegiality and trust, particularly in a court already so divided, is going to make compromise less likely.
Well, that's certainly unfortunate. We have only about a minute left. I think a lot of viewers would be curious, without giving your locations and all, what does the New York Times Supreme Court reporter do when the Supreme Court's not in session? I assume you're not sitting on the beach for 3 months.
I plan to do as little as possible. But I have a column that comes out every 2 weeks called Sidebar.
Right.
I usually try to write a long obituary of one of the justices, and my editors have no lack of ideas for things I ought to be doing.
Right. So I will not see you on the beach very much. Okay, fair enough. Thank you to New York Times Supreme Court correspondent Adam Liptak. Up next, the curious friendship of Rudolph Giuliani and former President Donald Trump. At one point, Rudolph Giuliani was riding a wave. Just after 9/11, he was labeled, that overworked phrase, America's mayor. He seemed to be so popular that in 2008, he ran for president. But his campaign went down in flames, and then so did he. The man who helped Giuliani get back on his feet was Donald Trump. It was the beginning of what my next guest calls a bromance that has been unbroken ever since. Andrew Kirtzman joins me now. His book, Giuliani, The Rise and Tragic Fall of America's Mayor, is out in September. Andrew, welcome, and thanks for this. 3 years ago, in 2019, I wrote a piece for BuzzFeed at their request. They asked a question that everyone was asking, probably still are. What happened to Rudy Giuliani? And my piece basically boiled down to nothing. He's still the same nasty, kiss up, kick down kind of guy that I always saw him. But I think your take is a little more subtle than mine on who he is.
It's a little different.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that anyone who knows Giuliani, worked with him, would tell you they don't recognize who he is right now. And, you know, behind the scenes, during his mayoralty and his prosecutor years, he was known as a very thoughtful, deliberate, very strategic, brilliant man, with a mean streak,
Yeah.
but a very, very talented strategist. And obviously he had a lot of accomplishments to show for it. Fast forward several decades and there's no discipline. He goes on television and he just kind of does this stream of consciousness thing, gets angry, loses his temper. There's just a lack of rigor to his thinking that did not exist back then.
And how do we explain that? And as a related question, you had a piece in the New York Times' Sunday Review 2 weeks ago describing the depression that he fell into after his 2008 debacle. I'd like you to discuss details of that. I know it figures in your book on him.
Right. Well, I think that if you could find a dividing line of kind of Giuliani's heyday and Giuliani's fall, it is the 2008 race. You know, he went into that race having been the front runner for almost a year. I mean, he was Rudy Giuliani. He was more popular than the Pope at the time. He was the hero of 9/11. The campaign was a complete disaster. You know, just a series of mistakes, tabloid kind of outrages, and the whole thing was just a colossal disaster. So now we're in January 2008. He's dropped out of the Florida primaries. He's got one delegate to show for it. His campaign is $4 million in debt, and he's fallen into depression. And he takes refuge at Mar-a-Lago, and Donald Trump takes him under his wing. According to Judith, his now ex-wife.
His third ex-wife.
His third ex-wife.
I feel I need to throw it.
Giuliani fell into quite a funk, and an alcohol-fueled funk. And you know, Judith Giuliani is a very, very controversial figure in Rudy Giuliani's camp. Some people feel that she's a great exaggerator, so I don't want to, you know, put too fine a point on it. But she provides a very, very detailed chronology of Giuliani's kind of alcohol-fueled collapse, and how Donald Trump kind of gave him privacy. There was a story in my book about how an employee shot photographs of Melania and Judith together doing yoga, and Donald Trump came and confiscated the employee's camera. Like, he just looked out after Giuliani. And I mean, the amount of loyalty, I mean, we're still seeing it between Giuliani and Trump, especially Giuliani's loyalty to Trump, is extraordinary. I mean, he's facing jail time, and he is not, as of today, turned on Trump at all.
Did that relationship between the two guys pre-exist that 2008 funk that he fell into? I mean, were they golf buddies, or was Trump an advisor in any way during Giuliani's mayoralty? I wasn't aware of that. If there was, it's news for me.
Right. I mean, most advisors would tell you that there was not a close relationship between Giuliani and Trump during the mayoralty. But, you know, if you go through the Giuliani mayoral archives, which we were, you know, had the advantage of doing in retrospect, there's a lot of communications between Trump and Giuliani that people weren't aware of. A lot of favors that Giuliani did for Trump. Giuliani spoke at the funerals of Trump's mother and Trump's father. He looked favorably upon Trump's development projects. And there was just kind of this mutual admiration society that went on between the two of them. You know, Trump to this day, every time he talks about Giuliani, he kind of starts by saying, Rudy Giuliani, the greatest mayor that New York ever had. And White House aides will tell you that Trump talks about Giuliani with a respect that is reserved for no one else except for Giuliani. He kind of venerates the old Giuliani, even though that Giuliani is long since gone.
It's gone. During the infamous January 6th rally before the riot, Giuliani spoke to the crowd and he said, let's have trial by combat. Now, he has since said, I've seen that now he is some sort of Game of Thrones reference, which sort of goes over my head because I was never a Game of Thrones fan, but one of three people in this country probably who wasn't, but
it was a good episode.
Yeah. I don't know, trial by combat, and we then had combat. Is he indictable for this thing? You were talking about indictments. He's been subpoenaed by the folks in Georgia who are investigating attempts to tamper with the election results there. How vulnerable is he?
There are 3 different investigations going on at Giuliani right now.
Wow.
One in the Southern District, one in the Justice Department, both election related. And strike that. The Southern District is looking into his Ukraine activities. Georgia and the Justice Department are looking into the election issue. You know, if I had a bet, I would think that one of those investigations, you know, could well result in his indictment soon.
Wow. What an extraordinary development that would be. I am on a lot of politicians' email lists, including his, and I get a tin cup rattling rather frequently from him. Is he in financial trouble?
He has said publicly that he could declare bankruptcy. I mean, think about his legal costs. Besides those 3 investigations, he's being sued by Dominion, among others, for
the election machine.
The election machine, the voting machines. I mean, there's, he just came through a very expensive divorce.
Right.
I mean, the man is just overwhelmed with lawsuits and investigations. I mean, at one point, Giuliani Partners had made $100 million. He owned 6 homes, 11 country club memberships. It was, I mean, he was spending money, like it was silly money.
Right.
That was a long time ago. Now his business prospects are nil. No one would ever want to be a client of his.
So Giuliani Associates really doesn't exist functionally?
Gone.
It's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a reason why he's knocking on my door for money.
I mean, he is, acting increasingly desperate for funds, selling memorabilia. I think he just recently used his name for My Pillow ad. I mean, there's a lack of shame and a desperation to what he's up to.
I do not normally ask questions like this. I feel private lives are private lives, but he's got a drinking problem, no? I mean, this is that becomes a public issue, right? And not just me sticking my nose where it doesn't belong.
He has a drinking problem, and it's not a private matter, it's a very public matter. If you remember during the January 6th testimony of Jason Miller, close aide of Trump's, he recalls that Giuliani, the night of the election at the White House, was drinking when he played a pivotal role in convincing Donald Trump to declare victory, even though it was far from clear that he had won the race. And my own reporting for the book quotes numerous people attesting to his drinking that night. And that was a moment in history. That was not a private issue.
Right.
That had an enormous effect on American history.
Absolutely. And continuing. I mean, we're still fighting this. For your book, you did not interview him, I believe, right?
No, Giuliani and I went back and forth.
You go back a long way, and you gave your first book on him back around 2001.
2000
was favorable on the whole. There were the warts there too, but on balance, I would have been pleased if I were he. So,
well, the first book was about his rise.
Right.
20 years later, it's about his rise and fall.
Yeah, fair enough. And he knew that this is what it would be.
Yeah, I mean, he was actually open to the idea of cooperating with me at the beginning of this project. We went back and forth about the fairness of the media and the liberal bias, et cetera. And after a whole bunch of conversation, the conversation stopped and he went dark. Never heard from him again.
The kind of folks who were with him, Bernard Kerik accepted, who were his key aides then, are they kind of uniformly shocked, dismayed, uncomprehending, all of the above, some of the above?
Well, Bernie Kerik is actually the one exception.
Right, that's why I said Bernie Kerik accepted.
I mean, almost all of his gang at City Hall, longtime advisors, have fallen away, and many of them are disgusted by his behavior during the Trump years. And these are people who were enormously proud of their work for him, and still have kind of love in their hearts for him as like a very magnanimous boss, someone they respected enormously, but feel embarrassed at this point. Kerik is kind of the last holdout. He is loyal to a fault with Giuliani, still defends him. Well,
I never understood how Bernie Kerik became police commissioner, but that's a separate matter. Not much time left. Andrew Giuliani, as we all know, has just run for governor. He's not going to be the Republican candidate. Have we seen the last of him? Does he really think he has a political future? He's not had a real job as far as I can tell.
I mean, he had no record. I mean,
none
Andrew
whatsoever.
Giuliani had zero record.
Right. So what it enabled him to think that, yeah, his entry-level position in politics would be
Right.
governor of New York.
Well, A, a lot of chutzpah, and B, the Giuliani name. And he seemed perfectly happy to let his candidacy become a referendum
On his father?
on his father.
Wow.
And we see how that ended
Well,
up.
it did not end up well.
Did not end up well.
Indeed. Thank you, Andrew Kirtzman. His book, Giuliani, The Rise and Tragic Fall of America's Mayor, is out this fall. For everyone at CUNY TV, I'm Clyde Haberman of the New York Times. Thank you for watching.